All right, great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are here today to talk about a new treatment on the horizon for heart failure. I am going to be the moderator of today's discussion, and with me is Dr. Michael Felker. He is a professor of medicine with tenure in the Division of Cardiology at Duke University Medical Center. He's also the chief of the heart failure section at Duke University Medical Center, and he did his training at Duke. So we're very excited for Dr. Felker to be here. He's published over 190 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters in the field of heart failure. So we, I think, are in very good hands on the topic. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Felker.
Sure. Thank you, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you fine. So before I turn it over, I would like to just give a little bit of an update about heart failure in America at this time, since we will be talking about a clinical trial that is happening. I just want to make sure that the audience is up to speed on heart failure and why this clinical trial is so important. So right now, about 6.5 million adults in the United States have heart failure. And heart failure was contributing cause of 1 in 8 deaths in 2017. And it's very costly. It's an estimated cost of $30.7 billion in 2012. And that included the cost of health care services, medicines to treat heart failure, and missed days of work. So heart failure is a condition in which the heart can't get enough blood to meet the body's needs. In some cases, the heart can't fill with enough blood, but in other cases, the heart can't pump the blood to the rest of the body with enough force. And some people have both problems. You'll hear the word ejection fraction, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that that is a measurement of how well your heart is pumping the blood. The ejection fraction for a normal heart will range between 50 and 70. And there are two main types of heart failure that you may be hearing about. And I just want to make sure that you understand that heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, which is in our terms HFrEF, is the type of heart failure also known as systolic heart failure. So that is when the heart muscle is slowly weakens and it loses its ability to pump the blood. So basically the heart muscle becomes really stretched out. And then the other kind is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, which is HFpEF, and that type of heart failure is known as systolic heart failure. And so there, the heart has lost the ability to relax, and the muscle becomes really stiff and hard. And so then the heart can't pump the blood as it should. So hopefully I didn't do too bad in that, Dr. Felker. And now
that was great. You can do the rest of you should just keep going.
No, that's okay. We'll leave it to the experts. So now I want to turn it over to the doctor and let him explain why this new clinical trial is so important.
First of all, thank you all for giving me the opportunity to chat with you and to talk a little bit about heart failure and about this specific potential treatment on the horizon that's currently being studied, and about a particular study that I'm involved in, which we're excited about, trying to test whether this new medication can be useful for patients with heart failure. So Andrea actually did a great job. Just to reiterate some of the things she said, heart failure really is a condition where the heart either cannot pump enough blood or cannot fill up correctly with blood, or sometimes both. And the symptoms that heart failure causes for most people, the three that we think of most commonly are fatigue, shortness of breath with exercise, and swelling, either swelling in the ankles or legs, or some people in their abdomen. And some people have all of those. Some people have just one or two. Some people might have none. But heart failure is an increasingly common problem. The majority of patients with heart failure are older, but it also can affect people at any age, including children. So it's a very important clinical problem in cardiology and an important public health problem in the United States and in the world. the trial that I'm going to be talking about today and the medicine that I'm going to be talking about is specifically for patients whose problem is primarily that the heart muscle is too weak to pump enough blood. So as Andrea said, that's heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, or also sometimes for shorthand called HFrEF. So there are about half the patients who have heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, or HFpEF, but this treatment we don't think is the right treatment for those people, because this treatment I'm going to talk about, which is has a name which is quite a mouthful, which is omecamtiv mecarbil, which you can't say 3 times fast probably, but I'm just going to call it omecamtiv for short. But what omecamtiv does, we've looked at it in studies so far, is it causes the heart to squeeze more effectively and better, so that for every heartbeat, more blood is ejected out to the body. So you might think of it as getting sort of more oomph out of every heartbeat, since we know that one of the main problems for people with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction is their heart cannot pump enough blood. The idea is that that this medication, which is an oral medication, it's a pill, would help increase the strength of the heartbeat and allow the heart to pump more blood and meet the needs of the body. And the hope would be, and again, this is all still being studied, so none of these things are proven. They're just things that we're hoping will be true, is that kind of medication would both, one, help people feel better and function better because their heart would be pumping more blood, but also help prevent them from ending up in the hospital for treatment and prolong their life. So the clinical study that I'm going to be talking about today is called METEORIC, which actually stands for something, multi-center exercise tolerance evaluation of omecamtiv mecarbil related to increased contractility and heart failure. And METEORIC is really focused on the first thing I said in terms of what we're hoping to accomplish with this drug, and that is to give a drug that lets people improve how much they can do, what we'll call their functional capacity. So you can imagine if you go to the store and you have to stop and catch your breath halfway through, we're hopeful that a drug like this would let you be able to do more exercise longer. And one of the things we'll talk about is how we're measuring and quantifying how people exercise in this study and how the treatment might help them exercise longer. So, Andrea, you can go to the next slide. So this just shows sort of an outline of the clinical trial, and it can be a little bit daunting to walk through, but just to sort of walk through. So the trial is designed to study patients who have heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Like I said, patients whose heart is not beating strongly enough to deliver the oxygen and nutrients needed to the body. There'll be about 270 patients studied in this particular trial. Patients will be screened, that is, talked to and looked at to see if they could qualify for the trial based on a variety of criteria. And if they do qualify and they're interested in participating, they would be randomized. Now, I think a lot of people are familiar with what randomized means, but just to reiterate, randomized means that the particular treatment that you get in this study, which could be the active drug that we're studying, omecamtiv mecarbil, or it could be a matching placebo, so just a sugar pill, is decided at random and blinded who's going to get which. So in other words, if someone was a participant in this trial, neither they nor the doctors taking care of them would know which they had been assigned to. And the reason we do that is because it's very important to understand what the benefits are of this new drug. And to be able to really understand that, we have to know how much better it is than placebo. And in truth, when you give people a placebo, many people actually feel better. And so to understand how the drug actually works, we need to have those controls. In this particular study, it's called a 2-to-1 randomization, which means that for every patient who gets randomized into the study, there's twice as much chance they'll get omecamtiv mecarbil as that they'll get placebo. And the reason for that is, one, we want to give as many people as possible a chance to be treated with this agent, which we hope is helpful. And also because we're still learning about this drug, we want to get as many patients exposed to it so we can really understand how it works. So The study has a total duration of 24 weeks. During 18 weeks of that, you'll be taking the study drug, so about 5 months of treatment. There are frequent clinic visits, especially at first, every 2 weeks for the first couple of months, and then they spread out some throughout the trial. And like many clinical trials, there's a variety of assessments that we'll be doing during the trial to understand how the drug is working, what the effects are on a variety of things. But this particular study, we're really focused on physical activity, how the drug can help people do more, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to make those measurements and figure that out. So, Andrea, if you go to the next slide. So the main way we're going to assess the benefits of omecamtiv in this study is through something called a cardiopulmonary exercise test, which is often abbreviated as CPET. And many people have seen pictures or videos of this. Sometimes you'll see like the Olympic athletes training. They'll be riding a bike and they'll have this funny face mask on. And essentially this test, the CPET test, is a way of quantifying, that is, providing a very precise estimate of how much exertion people's heart can do. One analogy I make is when we examine someone or do take pictures of their heart while they're just sitting there quietly in an examination room, it's really like looking at a car while it's sitting there idling, because the heart, in that case, is not really being asked to do very much. But cardiopulmonary exercise test, or CPET, is really like taking the car out on the racetrack and seeing how much it's able to do when it's pushed. So this test can be done either by walking on a treadmill or by riding a bicycle. The person who's taking the test wears a mask, which measures how much oxygen they're breathing in and how much carbon dioxide they're breathing out. And all that information is fed into a computer, which then can provide very precise estimates of how much exertion they're able to do, primarily using a measurement called maximal or peak oxygen uptake, which is also called the VO2. But the idea is to use this very precise test to really understand how much exercise people are able to do after they start taking this medicine compared to before. In this particular trial, patients who were approached about the trial would have one of these cardiopulmonary exercise tests done before they started in the trial to make sure that they were actually limited by their heart failure and see exactly how limited that was. And then again, after they had been treated with the medication, either placebo or the other medicine for some time, they would have a follow-up test to see how much it improved during treatment. So next slide, Andrea. So as I just said, the study is really designed to, the primary endpoint, which is what we call the main thing we look at, is how much exercise improves from baseline to 20 weeks using the CPET test, cardiopulmonary exercise test. We'll also measure some other variables that were provided by that test that can provide useful information about understanding how people exercise. And then another thing we're interested in is not just how people feel and exert themselves when they're riding a bike or walking on a treadmill, which is a little bit of an artificial situation compared to your day-to-day activities. We'll also be using what's called an accelerometer, which many people are familiar with, a device like a Fitbit or anything that you might have on your phone, or some people have one they wear on their wrist. It measures physical activity during daily life. So how many steps you take, how much activity you do, and that'll be done twice during the study, once before starting the study medication, and then again at the end for a 2-week period to again see how much does being on this study medication actually help people feel better and are able to increase their physical activity. Next slide. So I summarized some of this before. If people are familiar with clinical trials, not usually, all clinical trials have what's called entry criteria, or sometimes called inclusion criteria, which is what the people doing the study had decided was the patients who would provide the most information and have the best chance of benefiting from being engaged in the trial. So in this particular case, we'll be studying, like I said, about 270 patients. There's a long list of inclusion criteria, but some of the main ones are here, from age 18 to 85. Patients who have a history of known chronic heart failure, and in particular in this trial we're studying heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, and are receiving ongoing treatment for this, which is usually oral medications, willing to perform the 2 exercise tests, willing to wear the Fitbit style watch that I mentioned, and willing to participate in the clinic visits and other aspects of the study. So you can go to the next slide. So this just talks a little bit about some of the aspects of the trial, and I've touched on some of these earlier. So at the beginning, there's a screening period to figure out if the patient is suitable for the trial. This is when the patient would have their baseline exercise test, their first exercise test, to, again, make sure that they were the right sort of patient who had a chance to potentially benefit and provide information in this study. There's a treatment period, which is about 20 weeks, and I talked about how that would be randomized. So sort of like the flip of a coin or the roll of a dice, patients would either receive the drug we're studying, omecamtiv mecarbil, or a matching pill that was just a placebo, but neither the doctors taking care of you or the patient themselves would know which one. That's called blinding, so no one knows which one is which. There are codes that tell which arm each patient was assigned to, and at the end of the study is what's called unblinded, so we can actually look at the information and judge just how much better patients did or didn't do on the active treatment compared to the placebo. And then finally, there's a follow-up period which lasts for 4 weeks, just to check to see if there's any lasting effects of the drug after it's stopped. But again, the treatment goes out till about 20 weeks. So next slide. And this just goes over some of the tests that are being done as part of the trial. I mentioned the exercise test, which is there at the bottom. In addition, there's ECGs, which probably most people are familiar with. There are some blood draws to measure blood tests to make sure the drug is agreeing with you, and also to adjust the dose of the drug if needed. There would be physical examinations by physicians or other providers. There's questionnaires about the patient's experience and quality of life, how they're feeling, and the Fitbit type device that I mentioned called an actigraph. Next slide. So that was a brief presentation about a little bit about heart failure, a little bit about this treatment that is being developed, which I think is, has a lot of potential to hopefully be useful for patients with heart failure and reduced ejection fraction. Again, that's called omecamtiv mecarbil, and also a little bit about the METEORIC study, which is currently enrolling patients both in and outside the United States. And again, 270 patients globally to try to understand the benefits of this treatment. And I'm certainly happy to take any questions about the trial, about this drug, or any other relevant topic where I can be helpful.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to open it up for questions, and as you all know, you are all muted. But I can unmute you if you have a question and you would like to raise your hand, or you can type your question in the chat box and I can read it. To do both, if you go to the little white box that's over on the side of your computer, you'll see a hand raising feature. If you click that hand, it will alert me that you would like to be unmuted. Or if you type in the chat box, I will be able to I will be able to read your question out loud. So the first, we already have a bunch of questions in the queue. So the first thing that is on the questions are there any expected side effects?
Yeah, that's a great question to ask about any medicine, whether it's a medicine your doctor is prescribing that's already approved, or a medication that is given as part of a clinical study like this. So in our experience so far, and we've done a number of studies and are currently doing another very large study, over 8,000 patients in the world who have been enrolled in a study, a separate study taking this drug. The drug in general has been very well tolerated. For patients who were on a higher dose than is being currently studied now, there have been some patients who developed symptoms of chest pain, but that's really not been something that we've seen in patients at the dose that we're currently studying. So one reason I mentioned that we do a blood draw after patients start the study drug to see if the dose needs to be adjusted is to try and make sure that the dose remains in a very safe range. One of the potentially attractive things as a physician about this medicine, which is different than a lot of other heart failure medicines, many heart failure medicines that people might be familiar with that are on the market, which are very effective, but one of their side effects is they lower your blood pressure, and that can cause dizziness or other problems. And one of the nice things about this medication, which is different than most other heart failure medications that are out there, is that it doesn't lower your blood pressure, so it doesn't have that side effect, which is something we deal with and worry about a lot in patients who have heart failure who we're trying to adjust their medical treatment.
Great. So the next question is what is the reason that they do a blinding in the study? So can you explain why a double-blind study would be important?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. The reason is because what we found over the years is that often when patients are enrolled in a clinical study, they feel better because there's a lot of assessments, a lot of other opportunities to fine-tune other things about their care. People feel like they're getting a lot of being listened to, and people are really trying to understand their heart failure, which makes people feel better. And so it sometimes could be hard to separate feeling better just from participating in the clinical trial from feeling better from the treatment you're actually trying to study. And so there's really a few ways we try to tease that out, and I mentioned these. One is randomization. So in other words, we don't say we're going to give Mrs. Jones the active study drug and Mrs. Smith a placebo. It's randomized, so some patients get one and some patients get the other, but it's not something that anybody chooses. It just happens at random. And then the other aspect is blinding, and especially double blinding, which means that both the patient doesn't know which pill they're getting, and even the doctor is taking care of you don't know which pill you're getting until the very end of the study, when the study is over, when we look at the results. And that eliminates bias. We all know that we have biases, and certainly investigators who are studying and developing medications, we hope that they work. And so if we knew who was taking the drug, we might, because we're humans, be inclined to say, aren't you feeling a little bit better, Mrs. Jones? And so because of that, it's important to get the most accurate and precise picture of how the drug works, to have both randomization and blinding. Those are two really important aspects of most clinical trials.
Great. So I have three different questions that are kind of the same. So people are wondering where the locations for the testing are, and do you have to live in a specific area of the country, and how do you find out if you would be able to qualify?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there are sites all over the United States doing this study. I don't have a way to list them all here, but perhaps we can talk offline about how to get that information. You do need to live near enough one of the sites who's participating that you could travel there for visits, which, as I said, is every 2 weeks for the first couple of months, and then less afterwards. Many of these sites are in more urban areas, so most or certainly many big cities would have a site nearby, and perhaps we can figure out a way to get when this is posted, to get the list of locations and contact number for people if they're interested.
Yeah, that would be great, and we could pass that along to those. And somebody is asking, sorry, I was trying to read. It says there will be a website in February, so we will be able to link to that website that gives all of that information out.
Okay, great. I knew someone would come to my rescue there.
Yeah, sorry. I thought it was a question, and then I was like, wait a minute, that's not a question. That's okay, so Todd Donuts, I'm going to unmute you. You have your hand raised, and I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. Todd, are you there? You might have muted yourself, Todd. Can you hear me? Can you try to talk to us now? Okay, doesn't seem to be working. So, Todd, if you would like to type your question in, that would be fine, or maybe we can get you sorted out so that you can be unmuted. So the next question is, if something goes wrong between medication interactions, how will your team help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, so certainly anytime people are involved in a clinical trial, our highest priority is the safety of the people who are volunteering to participate in this study. So one of the reasons that the clinic visits are so frequent and there's so many different assessments in a study like this is because we want to make sure that the patients are protected and they're not having side effects or issues with interactions with other things about their medication. You know, as I said, one of the good things about this medicine is that it doesn't actually have many interactions with other medications. So in that sense, you know, that's one of the most attractive features. And I mentioned blinding in any clinical trial. If it seems there's an important safety need for some participant in the study to be unblinded so that their doctors can figure out where they're getting the actual study drug or where they're getting placebo, there are mechanisms to do that. We very rarely actually need to do that. Also, if there's some concern that a drug could be causing side effects, obviously the study drug can be stopped if that's needed. So there's multiple layers of protection, and then every clinical trial, including this one, has a committee of experts who are independent of the study, not participating in the study in any way, called the Data Safety Monitoring Committee, and their job is to actually look at all the information that's coming in from the patients enrolled in the study and make sure that there's nothing in the study that's going on that could be causing any safety problems for patients. And they're actually not blinded, so they can see who's on which medicine, and their real focus is on patient safety and protection. So that's another important layer of protection that's part of every clinical trial like this, including this one.
Great. So the next question I have is, do I have to stop taking my current medications? And does this drug actually increase injection fraction? And that is from Todd. So thank you, Todd, for typing.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. That's a great question. To the first one, no, you don't need to stop your current medications. In fact, one of the things that's very important is figuring out whether there's extra benefit of this new medicine on top of the medicines that we already know work for heart failure. So not only do you not need to stop them, we would definitely not want somebody to stop them because we want to show or test whether this medicine actually provides additional help, not just sort of replaces something that we already have. And sorry, tell me again the second part of the question.
Does this drug actually increase injection fraction?
Yeah, it does. Although depending on how you measure it, you might get slightly different measures. But I think one of the key things is many people are familiar with who have heart failure, having an echocardiogram and being told your ejection fraction is 35% or 40% or 20%, whatever it is. The change in ejection fraction that a drug like this would make would be relatively modest, but often small changes can have big clinical effects.
Great. So I think I will give everybody one more moment to type in their questions or raise their hand. But I have Sarah, you would like to be unmuted. I think you have your hand raised, that you could share some information about people that are interested.
Yeah, so if there are patients who are interested, if you would just provide your city and state to Andrea, then we can also provide a list, the current list of sites. But eventually, in February, we're going to be launching a patient-facing recruitment website that will list all the available locations.
Great. Thank you. So on my side, I will be fixing the slides in the beginning of this presentation, and then this will also be available through our webinars online. And so if any of you that are listening would like to share it with somebody or come back and reference this, that would be great. And I will send out a follow-up and with the information to the patient-facing website when it becomes available. But in the meantime, if you are interested, you can email me at andrea.baer, and that's ANDREA.Baer, BAER, at mendedhearts.org. And I will make sure that I get you the information on this exciting trial. And so without seeing any more questions, I would like to thank Dr. Felker for joining us today and explaining the clinical trial. You did a great job in making complicated matters very easy for patients to understand. So thank you.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
All right, everybody have a great day.